All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Lukas Kapp. I'm currently studying technical directing at an Institute at Filmakademie Baden-Württemberg. I'm currently in my diploma year, so I'm about to graduate, and my main focus is rigging and character effects, as you might can tell, because this presentation will also be about rigging and simulation of VFX creatures, especially about the creature of our short film According from the Earth to the Sea, which you will learn in just a minute. I will talk first a little bit about the GUI, then about my modular rigging tool I'm used to rig the whole creature, then a little bit about body rigging, facial rigging, and also muscle simulation, and in the end a little bit about my research project, which is called inverse rig mapping. So the GUI is the creature for the short film According from the Earth to the Sea, which is a short film about the 12-year-old girl Yasmin and her sister trying to escape the life of their father, trying to escape the life that their father has predetermined for them. In total, we have 8 creature shots and around 20 matte painting retouch shots, which we've done in around 2 years. So it's actually not that much of an amount, but we did it on purpose because our plan was to keep the quality output and not do quantity. And it's quite often that you underestimate the amount of work that goes into a lot of shots. On the creature, 8 artists worked on it, and over 30 on the shots, including other VFX shots. So we were quite a lot of people. And in the end, we also received the VS Award for Outstanding Visual Effects in the student project. We also did a little making of, which I will show you in a minute, so that you can get a glimpse of what we've done so far. Alright, so the GUI is our hero of our film, and our goal was to create a really high quality asset that could match with one of the big players, so the big studios. The design process was like way before I joined the team, like 2 years ago, and the idea was to create a humanoid quadruped hybrid. In the end, it's a mix between a human, a dinosaur, a kangaroo, and an ostrich. But we also had like a lot of influences of different desert creatures, and its face has similarities with the father itself, since in the story or in the movie, the ghoul is like the nightmare version of the father that chases the sisters in their dreams. Also, the wigging started quite early in the process, also during concept, to try out different locomotions and see how the creature moves and how we can design it better. Here, for example, you can see one of the first versions of the creature. It looks like a little bit different than it does in the end, especially the face changed a lot, but the main features are already there. Also, the wig was at the beginning was done via hand, so manual, but I moved then during production to a script, to a modular wigging based script, because in production you have like a lot of changes. It's never really a linear process, so you won't start wigging with the final model, and you need to be flexible toward changes. So having the wig as a script is way better, since you have the flexibility, and also it's much cleaner since everything is consistent. And finding errors can be a little bit easier at looking at the code and the complexity of the wig itself in, for example, Maya. And also once it was built, it was like we saved like a lot of time, especially when doing changes. So the general idea of this tool is to split every part in a module. So, for example, the left arm is one module, the right leg is one module, the head, and so on. And every module is like a kind of black box. So everything that the module does stays in the module, and only output and inputs goes in and out. For that, I've created a super module. So it's basically the base class, and every module inherits the base structure of the super module, and then the different specific things to the wig module gets then added via the util script, which is just a Python file with a lot of utility functions, for example, for matrix constraints, IK chains, FK, IK switch, and so on, which is shared between all modules. Also, I have another Python file for the controls, which includes the mail comments of different control shapes, so that you can access them quite easily. When every module is built, then it will in the end go through a finalized process, which will connect different wig attributes to the main master control, and also it will adjust the control shapes to the one in the control shapes template. So wigging or scripting control shapes is quite difficult, at least the shapes, because it's like quite cumbersome. So it's much easier to do it manually and just save it as a template. So in this step, it will just take this template and apply it, and then we have the final wig. In Maya, it looks like this. It's like a UI, and you press a lot of buttons, but the real magic is behind it. And as you can see, this is a wig template, and then or the control template, and then it gets applied. The body wigging itself is more or less relatively basic. There's nothing that much going on except for the so-called biped quadruped switch. So the problem we have is that the upper body is more like a human, or actually it is a human, but animating a human running on all fours is quite difficult if you have a biped, if you have a biped wig. So if you have your control on the wrist itself, if you would animate the quadrupeds, you have the option to manipulate the carpus area, so the area between the fingers and the wrist. So to have the flexibility, we added the switch for it, so that we have both versions, and the animator can just choose which one he wants to use. Also, we have, or I've created a script that matches automatically the switching, so that you can start, for example, in the biped version, and then just switch automatically to the quadruped version. Also, when you want to do a muscle simulation later on, it's really important that you also rig the skeleton, and also pay attention to the anatomical features. For example, this radius ulnus twist, or the sliding of the patella bone between the femur and tibia. or the scapular sliding of the rib cage, or the rib cage itself when it's breathing. Since if you don't rig those, then the muscle simulation wouldn't look right. The facial rig is mainly effects-based. It's mainly a effects-based blend shape system. We have like a lot of blend shapes that just trigger different muscle movements. But since the creature has only one expression, which is angry, we kicked out a lot of the action units that is normally used in the effects-based system, since it wouldn't make any sense to implement them, since it's just a waste of time. For the mouth, we did a joint-based approach to have more flexibility, and the real complex thing on the face rig is fleshy eyes, which was done with a shrink wrap deformer. So the outer lid is shrink wrapped towards the eyeball, and when the eyeball moves, the whole lid slides underneath it. Unfortunately, this is currently not GPU compatible in Maya, so the performance was a little bit decreased, but the overall performance was still very good, since I used a lot of matrix constraints and made everything parallel, so that Maya, or the rig itself, evaluates quite fast. Here you can see the final version of the muscle simulation. In total, we had, I think, 83 muscles that were simulated, all in Ziva. It's a Maya plugin for simulating tissue simulations. Normally, this would be a two-step process. So you would first simulate the muscles, then use them in the fat simulation as a collision object, and then simulate the fat. But for this creature, I covered them. So the muscle and the fat simulation is in one pass. So the fat reacts to the muscle and the muscle reacts to the fat. This has the advantage that you get a better deformation and also less collision errors. But it's way harder to fine-tune, since you always need to simulate both, since both have an effect to each other. Also, I created several scripts to speed up my asset and shot work. For example, renaming, mirroring, saving, and loading the setup, and also applying animation. A little bit about the workflow of the muscle simulation. So first, the ends of the muscle are attached on the bones via constraints. On the right, you see all the constraints I've used. Red are the ones that are fixed, so they are static, and it's like really gluing it together. And blue are sliding constraints, so they are, like the name says, slice over the surface. The sliding constraints are mainly used to attach muscles to each other. And then you add fibers to the muscle so that it reacts like a real muscle. And important is that to check the fiber directions. So for example, if you look a bit closer on the picture on the right, you see that these little lines are showing the direction of the fiber, and it's important that it's the real one, so that when it contracts realistically. I paid a lot of attention to that, and looked a lot at references of anatomy books to really keep this as real as possible. Also, I added a tendon material, so tendons are a little bit stiffer than muscles itself, so it's important that you also add those, since if you wouldn't add them, then some part of the muscle would look differently or look worse. Then you would go to each muscle and find the right setting. Again, this is like a really time-consuming setup, because normally I would first simulate the muscles, then add the fat, and then check again the muscles, how they look, since the muscle and the fat react to each other. And the firing of the muscles is done via curves. So if the curve is shortened, then the muscle contracts, as you can see here. So red is no firing, so it's not contracting. Yellow is firing, so contracting. And this made it really easy to have a contraction system. After that, but before you get to the fat, you need to create the fat. So normally you get the outer layer of the mesh. So it's basically the body or the thing that you would model, for example, in ZBrush. I'm using that to shrink wrap it to the anatomy to create an inner layer, which is more or less a fascia layer. Both of this layer gets combined, and this will be then the fat in the simulation. The effect of this fat, as you can see in the right, is that the anatomy slides underneath this layer, and yeah, exactly. I added several sliding constraints to help to solve this collision, since only with this shrink wrap sort of thing, it's sometimes hard to have a stable simulation. So adding some sliding constraint can help, definitely help. And also it sometimes helps to pin and shape certain areas. In the end, I added several different materials to shape a little bit the simulation. For example, have less pressure, so less of a shrink wrap effect, for example, on the rib cage, or to have like a stiffer material on some parts of the body. For example, the scales, so the creature has also scales. The scales have like a stiffer material, since scales are normally stiffer than fat. After that, the mass simulation is, or the fat simulation is simulated, and the outcome is the one you see on the right. As you can see, if you look closely to, for example, the head, the mesh is closed, so you can't really use that for rendering. Also, the vertex order, again, in general, the topology doesn't match with the one for modeling. So the normal process would be that you wrap the model, so the model you get from modeling, to the fat mesh, and then use that as a blend shape target to the animation, and then you blend between the animation and the simulation. For example, the heads and the feet, or the hands and feet won't be simulated. So this one will come from animation, and the rest is all simulated. In the end, there's still some areas that might need some fixing, and it's often easier to do it in shot sculpting. So basically you go over the frame that doesn't look right and you just model it, and then you trigger it on the specific frame. You could, of course, also change some settings, but it's way more time consuming than just doing it the fast way with shot sculpting. Yeah, so much to the GUI. Now, as part of the technical directing course, there's also the research project, for which I've chosen again a topic related to rigging, and my goal is to solve the so-called inverse rig problem, which occurs when you want to map back skeletal animation to rigs. So basically retargeting, for example, mocap data. It's often or the available retargeting solutions are often limiting. For example, human IK of Maya only works with biped, and most of the time only FK. I mean, you can do IK solutions, but it's like really hard. And if you do custom solutions, they are not really flexible, since they are most of the time adjusted to the rig itself. So that's why I built a toolset based on the paper Learning an Inverse Rig Mapping for Character Animation by Danny Holden, to use machine learning to map the skeleton animation data back to rigs. So basically the rig, or the machine learning model is trained with the rig attributes. Then the model knows the correlation between the rig attributes and the joints. So if you move one joint, one control, sorry, the joint is also affected, and this correlation, you will train the model with it, and then you can give the machine learning model back the skeleton animation, and it will predict the attributes on the rig itself. It's currently still in development, so there's what you will see is not the final outcome yet. So we start by generating the training data. Of course, for machine learning, training data is one of the most important steps. So it's an automatic process. You just select the 3 joints for this example and the control and choose the number of random poses you want. It's random values between the ranges that get automatically set. In the end, it should the minute max range should be custom, but right now it's like it's automatic. For example, this is train data. In this case, it's just a portion of it. In total, I think I've used for this 2,500 different poses. As you can see, there's like translation, XYZ, and rotation. For rotation, I'm using rotation metrics since Euler angles tend to flip by 90 degrees and over. So it's like really hard for the machine learning model to learn with that. And after you've granted the data, you just press a button and train the model. Since implementing different libraries in Maya, or Maya Python is quite hard, I'm using a sub-process. So basically, it's using a custom Python environment that already has all the needed libraries and train the model. For the machine learning part, I'm using PyTorch with the gPyTorch library, which is a special library for Gaussian process regressions. And in the end, you have the animation. For example, this arm, you select it and just train the or just predict the outcome. As you can see, it's not matching 100%. But it's fairly close, and the goal in the end is that it's like almost pixel perfect, I would say, but at least much more closer. That's also the future plans, or the planned feature that I want to implement. It's also working with more complex characters. Right now, I'm working with more complex characters, but it's like not really what the outcome is not really what I want right now, so that's why you have only saw a little arm, so a fairly basic rig. And also it's a goal of mine to implement a node, a Maya node, to load the model itself in Maya and to predict everything in Maya, so that you don't need to have the extra step when predicting over the sub-process into Python. So yeah, that's from my side. Thank you for listening. Questions, anyone? Yeah.
Because I'm not using Maya,
yeah.
Is there any chance to have, like with the Cinema 4D, having the capability like the muscle simulation or the fat?
Probably. I mean, Ziva is also just a plugin. I mean, there are Maya muscles, so an own muscles system built in Maya, but it's not a simulation, it's a deformer. I don't know if Cinema has something like that. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, the Ziva thing is just FEM. So if Cinema has like something FEM style, then you could probably use that. Otherwise, Houdini, for example, with the Vellum workflow, is also has like a muscle simulation. Vellum is particle based, so yeah, I'm not sure the capabilities of Cinema. So, but if there are some things to solve soft tissues, then I think you could also do that in Cinema. But of course, it's like a custom solution. It's harder to implement. Well, you need to do it by yourself, I would say.
Yeah, it's Cinema. You have to shape the muscle by yourself, but
yeah, I mean,
not in the shape automatically, right?
No. No, the muscles you saw are modded, so.
So you need a model.
Yeah.
And
no.
then there's a bones also.
Yeah, exactly, everything. The whole anatomy is like a model, so polygons, and they are converted. So the muscles are converted to tetrahedral meshes. So like an standardized model for Ziva to work on, and then in the end map to the polygons again. But as a starting point, you need models, yeah. polygon models.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. But the advantage of Ziva is that you also have like transfer options. So there are some tools so that you can just, for example, buy anatomy model online, TurboScript, whatever, and just transfer it to your character. There are some things you need to consider. So it has to be the same topology and so on, but it can be a quite good starting point if you don't want to spend like a lot of time in modeling anatomy, because it is quite a lot of time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
So you said you scripted a lot of your rigging setup.
Yeah.
To what extent, or what was included in the bone placement was not scripted, right?
No, I mean, so the whole body rig is scripted fully. I mean, what you saw, it's the body rig, so you press the buttons. I mean, you could actually just do one button, but to debug, I have several buttons. But yeah, the bone placement is not scripted. I decided against that because most of the time you would just use locators, for example, or any other guiding solution, I don't know, controls, whatever, any shape that you would be or symbolize the joint later on. But in my opinion, it's like not really that worth it, at least if you do it for yourself, which in this case it is. It's not like a tool that was meant to the broad audience, I would say. So it's just a tool for myself, and I don't need the step to place guides and then convert those guides back to joints. So I just using joints instead in the beginning. This was the main idea why the joint placement, for example, isn't automized.
And at the end of the pipeline, how far? So then when it goes to weight painting of the muscles and all that, yeah. That was manual work again. So that
the muscles aren't weight painted.
Or I mean, your fiber, fiber directions.
The fibers are manual painted.
So when did the scripting end and when did the manual work?
I mean, the muscle simulation. So the muscle simulation is a different part. So the rigging itself is like the character, and the muscle is like a different Maya file. You could. I mean, it is a different Maya file, but it's like a different department, I would say. I mean, it correlates. So you need to keep some details in mind when you do rigging. For example, the skeleton, it needs to be like some features like the radius ulnar twist and so on. You need that. And if you don't implement, then the muscle simulation would look a little bit different. But the muscle simulation part in the whole is like pretty manual. The only thing I'm using to speed up my workflow is like the Ziva manager you saw on the right, which is like automatic renaming stuff. So, for example, if I do a constraint, it names on a certain naming convention, so I don't need to do it manual. But all the placements is manual. Again, you could also use those Ziva transfer tools to transfer those stuff. But since we have only one creature, you need to start with one. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the muscle simulation also included, like deforming like this bone? Because like here it's bone deforming. It's also included?
No, I mean the whole skeleton it's not. I mean it's realistic as much as possible, I would say, but it's not like medical realistic. Like, I mean that's what you meant, right? That you have like different tissues, something in between the bones and so on.
The sharp deforming, the sharp lines because the bone understands there beneath there.
I mean so you mean that it's like hard here? So it's no, this is included in the simulation, yeah. To do that, I mean, first of all, you have the skeleton included in the simulation, so it's like a collision object, and the fat and the muscle react to the bones itself. And for example, for the elbow, you could just constrain that to that, so that you have like a fixed constraint here, and then it's more or less glued to it. To shape the way if it's not the right outcome of the simulation as you want.
So it's calculated both muscle and the bone.
The bones are coming from animation, so it's not the behavior or the movement of the skeleton is not included in the muscle simulation. It's like
how the bone push the shape. I don't know how to put it.
I'm sure if we're on the same topic.
Do you mean the skin movement, like when you're just in your bone, like you're here, the skin move and
like the bone push that skin out to make this.
I mean, the fat reacts to the bone. So if the bone rotates, then the skin slides or the fat slides over it.
That's also.
Yeah.
Fat include.
Yeah, I mean, normally you would also do like a skin pass, so simulate the skin itself, and it creates wrinkles. We decided against it, first of all because we had no time, but also because the creature has like a lot of wrinkles, has scales. It's like really it would be a tough time to simulate the skin. So we decided, okay, with fat it looks already nice. And also the shots aren't really full body shots, so it's most of the time just shoulder and upright. So we didn't really saw that much, so we decided against that. But yeah. Welcome.